Gamez Season 1 is in search of workshop leads. June is the prep month, a library of recorded sessions that gets a whole cohort of first-to-vibe coders ready before the ship a thing this July. If you have built something worth teaching, you have a session to give. Visit ZABALGamez.com, that's ZABAL Gamez.com, and sign up. What is the ZABAL Gamez? 3 months, June, July, August. June is prep with ZAL teachers, vibe coding instructors run recorded sessions on tools, context, and the ecosystem. July is the open build-a-thon. Anyone with the vibe coding harness ships a build for the ZABAL ecosystem publicly. August is the finals, a cohort curated from July, each builder paired with a ZAL mentor for the main event, winner reveal.
Awesome. What's up, everybody? I'm here today for another ZABAL Gamez workshop, here with Cassie, Cassandra today to talk about Farcaster. So excited to get into this presentation and just get the word about Farcaster out there. And if anyone has questions, feel free to pile them up and we'll get to them at the end. How are you doing today?
Doing all right. It's been a bit of a crazy day, but I'm here, so we're good to go.
I love it. Awesome. It's good to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to see some of the other presentations, so I'm going to be pretty upfront. Like, this is not necessarily going to follow the exact same format the others did, but I think that it'll be relatively useful regardless, because there's a lot about the Farcaster protocol that people aren't aware of. Some pretty important gotchas, but also some pretty important distinctions that should be made. Like, there's obviously been a lot of drama on the timeline around Snapchain versus Hypersnap, and it's important to like actually illustrate what those differences are, why they exist, and also where we should be thinking directionally and how we can support clients and mini app builders and snap builders and in the road ahead. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open this slideshow, and I hope to God that this works as intended. Looks like it did, but so today we're going to be talking about the Farcaster protocol, the ins and outs of it. And bear with me for any typos. This was very hastily put together because of some unexpected events that happened today. So to start things off, quick agenda. We're going to be doing basically, you could argue, 2 different parts to this. The first half is going to be setting the stage for why the protocol is the way it is, why there's a fork and what that actually means. And then we're going to dive into the nuance of that, what we rely on externally on either side of the protocol, how the architecture of Snapchain works, how the architecture of Hypersnap works, and then talk about a few like important security bits that may be relevant not only for people building on the protocol, but also just some helpful information in terms of protocol builders in general and the types of attacks you have to worry about, especially once you start to integrate a cryptocurrency into it. And then last, we'll talk about what's next and try to dive through some of the code if we still have time to do so. So to start things off, Farcaster is, or at least as it was originally billed, was a sufficiently decentralized social network. Never been really fond of that term, but I want to kind of like pick it apart real quick so that folks can understand what that actually means anyway. Sufficiently was basically a label applied to how the network worked in a semi-permissioned format. Because when it comes to building social media applications in general, it tends to require a lot. You have to have data storage for things like images and video. You have to have an index of identities to represent the users that are on the network. And the nature of building decentralized protocols carries a lot of risk in general. Farcaster first started as just a centralized backend that had a kind of like blockchain engine behind it. And then very quickly we moved to what was called hubs. Bear in mind, like I used to work with the Merkle team back before they shut down, but we ended up creating hubs as a way to try to actually decentralize the network. And in doing so, we learned a lot of powerful lessons, which is one, if you don't have any sort of incentive mechanism behind it, then you will have people who will just, act very brashly on the network and cause a lot of chaos. And we had a lot of chaos. When we first started hubs were semi-permissioned. If you wanted to run a hub with write access to the protocol, then you had to have a PR approved to add your validator. And then as we hardened the hub implementation, we ended up actually opening it up completely permissionlessly. So anyone could run a hub, all the hubs would sync with each other. And boy, howdy, did that have its own problems. But any hub could sync with each other, and the network data would live on all of the hubs and become eventually consistent. The problem is that it was written in JavaScript. So JavaScript itself already going to take on a very heavy fee in terms of data cost and compute cost. JavaScript just generally runs slower than a properly compiled language like Rust. But at the end of the day, we hit scaling limits because we started to have, up to 100,000 daily active users. It was a really amazing time, but it was also a really stressful time because the protocol really was not able to handle it. And so enter Snapchain. Snapchain was basically a full rewrite and re-architecture of how the Farcaster protocol should work. And similarly to hubs, we started off with this idea that we would be permissioned to begin with, and then we would finally, once we've nailed down all the issues, move to a permissionless set of validators. So when we talk about the concept of sufficiently decentralized, there's two problems to think about. The first is the actual protocol itself. Presently, validators on Snapchain are controlled by Nanar. There's 6 validators, 5 of them are Nanar, 1 is Uno, and control of the validator set is effectively control of the network. That's today. And to their credit, they do want to expand the validator set, but at the end of the day, you still have centralization forces in the form of who controls the validator set and how that all works. Problem 2 is that when you're talking about decentralized social media protocols, you can think of like Mastodon or Blue Sky. Mastodon's kind of like an all-in-one scenario. Like it has the backend, it has the synchronization primitives, and it has basically a web client that runs on top of it. There's other Mastodon clients, they can all interface with one another, and it's kind of janky, but it works. Blue Sky's a little bit more top-heavy, where clients are fully separate from the backends, but clients themselves do have some interesting problems that they have to solve as a standalone client. And Farcaster is really no different in that. You can't really build a client directly against Snapchain. The APIs themselves on Snapchain don't actually give you enough data to build a meaningful client. If you wanted to build a client that behaves like the Nanar Farcaster app or Quorum or any of the other clients out there, you have to actually have a separate indexer that is, finding out like, okay, I want to see the feed of all the stuff I'm interested in. So it has to pull the list of all the people that you follow and then build a feed using all the people that you follow, all of their casts, all their reactions, etc. But doing that means that you do have to have a backend to support that client separate from the protocol itself. You'd have to do, your own indexing of data on Snapchain, feed generation pipelines, support for notifications, and a lot of scraping of semantic content. Something that people probably noticed recently on Quorum, because when you cast to a channel, up until yesterday, basically, it was targeting the wrong thing. It was targeting the on-protocol identifier, which meant that anybody using Nanar's Farcaster app, for example, we're seeing things appearing in the wrong place. I would say responding to external content. So there's a lot of little, basically tech debt hairs that have accumulated in the overall corpus of code, not just the protocol, but also the backends that exist, the clients, etc. It really, really hurts the overall vision of having a sufficiently decentralized protocol. So, first and foremost, when I began the Snapchain fork, in terms of Hypersnap, it was explicitly because, one of the things that would come up whenever there was criticism against the direction of Merkle with Farcaster, there was this, this very kind of trite response of opportunity for another client. And as you can see with problem 2, it's not that easy to actually build a client. So we set a few goals in mind with the fork itself and what we want to do. Because at the end of the day, regardless of any ideological differences between the closed source Nanar team and the open source Farcaster org team, We both do want to see Farcaster succeed. I have no doubt in my mind that we are ideologically aligned about wanting to grow the protocol, wanting to grow users, and wanting to get people building on the protocol. And so it's very important to understand, like, okay, how do we frame this in the context of what should we have happen? And so one of our main goals is that it should be very easy to build a client. You should be able to do it in a weekend. Now, when we set that goal in mind, it was about 6 months ago at this point. And it's crazy because in those 6 months, the world of AI has grown so impressive and powerful and autonomous that it's actually quite easy to build a Farcaster client over a weekend without really even having to understand how any of it works. But there are some important things to keep in mind, just because the AI can figure out a lot of things for you. But if you aren't aware of what choices it's making with respect to the protocol, you could be accidentally locking yourself into things like having Nanar as a dedicated provider, or missing details about the contracts, like the smart contracts that relate to the protocol and how that has extended impacts on the user experience. So we're going to go through that. To start things off, Snapchain is the existing data layer of Farcaster. It is a shard-based Byzantine fault-tolerant chain. It is, in fact, a blockchain. Previous iterations of the Farcaster protocol were not, but this one is. And there are 3 shards on Snapchain. There's shard 0, which is the core block engine that basically drives the protocol, its understanding of users on the network. Basically, who's registered for an account, who's bought storage, how much storage, what is their name on the network if they're not using an external one like an ENS name, and potentially also whether or not they're a Farcaster Pro subscriber. Shard 1 and Shard 2 are literally just taking your FID as a number, dividing it, or really just like dividing it by 2, and then based on whether you're even or odd, you fall into bucket 1 or bucket 2. That's Shard 1 and Shard 2. The second thing is that it has a certain keying approach. So in other words, when you put data on the network, there's a unique identifier associated with everything that you do. And that unique identifier is basically split in a way that it can support whatever shard model that is chosen. Presently, just divide by 2. But if the shard model were to expand, it's at least amenable to alternative shard designs so that you can spread out the data across more and more nodes. However, presently, a full validator node is replicating shard 0, 1, and 2's blocks. In fact, actually, to be a validator, you're really basically running a blockchain with extra steps. It's technically 3 blockchains, but really just rolls into one. And at this time, Snapchain is still designed such that it is, replicating all 3 shards. Read validators have a little bit of flexibility. If they really wanted, they could say, I only care about shard 1 or shard 2 or shard 0. I don't think anybody's configured it this way, but it's possible to do. In terms of how HyperSnap fits into this overall picture, you can think of it as an additive layer. In part because we're very keen about not disrupting the network. We want to work together. And so by consequence, everything that we do adds to rather than conflicts with. And so what that means is that HyperSnap itself and all the things that it's doing is actually running what is effectively a parallel network, or in more classical blockchain parlance, a sidechain. The way that we do consensus is a little bit differently. It's still BFT, but we do a special MPC protocol, or multi-party compute protocol, to construct what is a threshold ECDSA key. ECDSA, if you're not familiar, is the signing algorithm used by a lot of networks, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all the EVM chains alike. ECDSA is just that simple signature process. When you pop open your wallet and it says, hey, I need you to sign for something, you are creating what is an ECDSA signature. EOAs on Ethereum, or the external accounts, those are just ECDSA public keys that have been hashed to produce a public address. And the reason we chose this approach was specifically because everything that gets validated on the network, we want to be able to relay that state to other networks. In the case of Ethereum, this is important for things like the Snap token. We have some places in which we use Verkle trees, which that's more of an implementation detail, but it's relevant because this is actually a future roadmap item for Ethereum itself, and we're already aligned to be compatible with the future of Ethereum. This is really important for very small proofs. Basically, the difference is between a Merkle tree and a Verkle tree. You can think of a Merkle tree as essentially a tree that changes its hash value whenever you mutate the tree. But creating a proof of content on that means that you have to basically go every step of the tree up, take the hashes, and then give those hashes as part of your proof string, which the bigger the network gets, the bigger the tree gets, the bigger the proof gets. Whereas with a Verkle tree, it's constant size. You give two small point values and you can prove anything on the network, which is a lot nicer, but at this time on Ethereum, actually using a Verkle proof is very expensive in terms of gas. They don't have all the primitives in place for it yet. So in the current iteration, we're still using a Merkle tree for things that need to be proven for the bridge so that the cost of gas, despite the proof size being a little bit larger, is compatible and cheap. A distinction, like I said, we are basically a sidechain. So the hyper signer messages, which is basically an envelope over the messages that get sent out on the protocol for consensus, they never enter Snapchain. If you are a Snapchain node and you're talking to a hypersnap node, you just think you're talking to a Snapchain node because the node knows not to talk anything that's not Snapchain to you. Because again, we're not trying to break the network. And then, of course, the other substantial component is that it adds the Snap token, which supports confidential transfers, has a bridge, there's proof of work scoring involved for consensus, there's the mini app registry, node attestations, and a whole bunch of other things that we'll get into in just a bit. In terms of how the protocol works with overall things like identities and names, we have some external anchors, and these are important regardless of which side of the protocol you're involved with. The first is the OP mainnet contracts. There's basically 4 of them, and the 4 of them are bundled together in a single call, which makes things easier for builders, but practically nobody uses this aside from client developers. The 4 pieces are the ID registry, which is how FIDs are assigned. It's basically a number that increases with every single person that decides to buy an account. And that's super cheap. Like the FID registry itself, super cheap. But then you have things that are in the form of annual costs. So there's the storage registry. A lot of people don't really understand how the storage registry applies, but basically when you buy a storage slot, you're basically saying, hey, I am willing for the protocol to hold, 3,000 casts. I'm willing for the protocol to hold 5,000 likes and recasts, things like that. The storage registry applies to Snapchain. The Hypersnap side does not care. We have no interest in a annual subscription fee regime just to use the network. It doesn't really align with the idea of having a protocol that can grow to thousands or millions or even billions of users, because at the end of the day, most people are not going to pay to use social, and there's much better opportunities for revenue outside of hard-coded smart contracts. But that's a distant thing to talk about. The other things that do matter are the key registry. Key registry is how a signer is produced. So you have your FID, you have a custody wallet that owns that FID. That would be your internal Ethereum wallet that you can't really do anything with on the Nanar app, but basically that seed phrase that you use to log into your account if you ever get logged out, that's actually an Ethereum wallet. And then the public key and the corresponding address is what actually has rights to control your FID. When you're using the Nanar app and quite a few of the other clients, it's actually preparing a ED25519 key. That is a Edwards curve key. It's similar to it's actually the same curve as the one Solana uses, but the purpose of that key is to provide actual signing of the messages of things that you put on the network. So instead of controlling the contracts, this is your casts, your reactions, etc. The key registry recently was amended on on the protocol itself. Snapchain supports the OP mainnet contract for key registry, but it costs, actual tangible money in ETH that you have to spend every time on OP mainnet if you want to add a signer. It's kind of messy, kind of kludgy. Not to mention that it has a cost associated. So if you want to revoke a key, you have to pay to revoke a key, which can be quite hairy in the event of a signer compromise, like say a client goes malicious or whatever. But the protocol has been extended, so now there's what's called a gasless signers. Gasless signers is an FIP that I proposed basically right after the Skedley compromise, where Risha's signer was compromised and was promoting a clanker scam token, and it happened late at night, of course, because attackers are smart and know not to try to scam people when the person that they're compromising would be normally awake. But the gasless signers feature basically makes it very easy to revoke without cost, even add a key without cost. You have a limited number of signers you can add, just like anything else that's mediated by the storage registry, but that's the basic gist of it. The last contract that relates to the core bundle is the FNAME registry. So a username on Farcaster has what's called an FNAME or Farcaster name. It binds to your FID, and also because it is technically an NFT in structure, it can also be transferred. These are things that relate to the core original Farcaster contract set. Merkle last year added Farcaster Pro, which that subscription is an annual subscription, or sometimes shorter than that. You actually can choose at the contract level, but the app itself exposes it at least as a yearly renewal, where you can have additional features on the protocol. Those additional features include long casts, which is a up to 10,000 character limit cast. You can have up to 4 embeds in a single cast instead of 2. You can also add a few things to your user profile, like a banner. This costs a decent chunk of change every year. And again, in the spirit of what Hypersnap aims to do, we simply don't care. We'll accept traffic from Snapchain that has Farcaster Pro subscriptions, but if you're interacting with Hypersnap itself, you can actually get all those features for free. And then on the Hypersnap side, there is a contract to be concerned with. That would be the Snap token itself. There's a specific amendment to what are otherwise standard ERC20 contracts called Hypersnap Bridge, which allows you to wrap the Snap token onto the L1. It is actually possible to deploy this contract to any other EVM network. It's already set up to do so that the address stays the same. So no matter which network you're on that's EVM, the token address will always be the same token address. And this is where that MPC-based signer approach works, because whenever the protocol has a new block, which means that any transfers that have happened, any bridge events that have happened, is encoded in that Merkle root. That Merkle root's signed by the quorum of validators on Hypersnap. What this means is that that message is actually instantly relayable. So if you bridge a token, for example, onto ETH mainnet or base or whatever L2 you choose, that signed output of each subsequent block being created is actually freely transferable to the contract itself. So you get basically gasless bridging that allows anybody to bridge a token over to whatever network of their choice, and you can literally just take the headers of the block messages and relay it to the contract, and the contract can disambiguate and confirm that you have in fact bridged that token over and it is your rightful token to claim. We have some, like I said, standard Open Zeppelin-based contracts for the ERC20. It's a proxy-based deployment, so if there's ever any issues that come up, we're able to, respond in a way that enables a rapid upgrade for security purposes. However, that upgrade control is actually decentralized because, again, every single validator on the network is a member of this quorum, and that's very important. So for cross-chain interactions, we do have a Merkle state root and a lock Merkle root, which enables the bridge to function cheaply. And then anybody can be a relayer that submits those block headers such that they're able to claim their bridge or note the change of validators that have occurred. That makes it very straightforward to do so. The other important thing is that we also have some basic safeguards in place in terms of like validator consensus and how that actually gets relayed to those chains, so that it becomes very, very difficult to interact with the bridge contract without having a meaningful and proven signature that relates to the set of validators on the network. So under the snap chain architecture, it has a specific consensus mechanism, which is Malachite. Malachite is basically another Byzantine fault-tolerant algorithm. It's literally just a Rust implementation of Tendermint. Tendermint has its own drawbacks. It of course, being basic BFT means that if over 1/3 of the validators are offline, broken, malicious, etc., then the network will effectively halt. But it's also very, very blindingly fast, which has led to the blockchain or the block times of Snapchain being 1 second blocks. Now, I've already made some recommendations to the Nanar team about what they need to do when they're planning on extending geographies, because anybody who's ever had to deal with like BFT-based algorithms, they've likely understood this problem. The shorter your block time, the harder it is for consensus to be reached when your nodes are further and further apart. The speed of light does not care about your ambitions. And so by consequence, you need to have the ability to ensure at least 2/3 consensus over that block time. And if you don't, then the network will halt. And so it's very likely that when they finally, the Nanar team, finally moves to add additional geographies, they're going to hit the consequences of the speed of light. To have a full round trip between peers, just 3 peers in equidistant points on the globe, you need at least 250 milliseconds of time for that consensus to occur. But when you have more nodes than that, now you have to deal with the latencies point to point between all of them. So they're likely going to extend this. I recommended 3 seconds. They may go further, but they may decide not to do that. I don't know. Whatever the case, all these have block proposers and shard proposers. So shard 0 is the block proposer that actually binds everything together, and then the shard proposers are the individual shards. But again, every single validator has to cover all of these, so they're just basically participating in parallel across all of them. There's the simple, basic proposal, vote, commit, decide approach of your standard Tendermint consensus. And then you have read validators, which are the majority of the nodes that are on the network, that simply verify and rederive, confirm that their version is aligned. And if it is, commits the block and everyone's happy and all the data's there. There are some additional notes that come into play with Hypersnap, and I'll get to that in a sec. Also in Snapchain is where the storage layer exists. It's a RocksDB instance that has a few specific parameters configured after some memory profiling that I did, and some memory profiling that the Nanar team also did on their end after they realized this was a problem hitting them too. And some various caches that are in place to make getting data surfaced to integrations, not necessarily clients, but integrations as fast as possible. There's per FID stores, so every time you cast something, it goes into the cast store, or delete, it goes into the cast store. The reaction store, which is your likes and recasts links, which are the people that you follow. User data store, which is your profile data. Verification store, which is your verified addresses. So if you've ever looked at somebody's profile and seen, oh, they have like 6 ETH addresses and 1 Solana address, that's the verification store. And also the addition recently of the signer store, which gives the gasless signers. It is all based on a Merkle tree. And the reason it's based on a Merkle tree in the Snapchain sense is because this is literally just an extension of the original hub architecture. So everything that was stored on hubs, and the way it was indexed on hubs, and the way it was represented on hubs from at the raw data layer even of a key value pair, all of that extends from the original hub architecture, and it remained compatible with it. The benefit of that meant that migrating the data over was very, very easy. You just simply point to the previous RocksDB instance, and it would uplift that data, or at least so we thought. There were some engineering challenges because as the famous American warrior poet Mike Tyson once said, everybody think they got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. So, hypersnap architecture. We have what is essentially an actor-driven model. That's not necessarily unlike Snapchain. It's just that we have a lot more actors at play. Actors you can think of as not in the LLM sense, but in the programming sense, are just autonomous processes that can speak to one another. We have a hyper actor that runs alongside the Snapchain consensus loop. The way this works is we have inbound events from Gossip, which enables the protocol, like the side protocol of Hypersnap, to communicate, coordinate, if they need to rotate keys, if they need to sign new blocks, it doesn't really matter. These all come across as hyperactor events, which are a little bit different than the Snapchain events. And then, of course, there's queues that run in both directions. There's inbound and outbound messages, and how we broadcast to them is essentially a standardized message format so that every participant can support those messages meaningfully. We also split these out on dedicated topics. So if there are things that a node runner doesn't need to care about, like maybe they're not running a Hypersnap validator, they're just ingesting data, then they can skip all that. Per actor, there is only at most one distributed key generation ceremony, which is what enables that ECDSA signature to exist in the first place. One signature ceremony itself, which is what produces the migration of keys and the output block headers that can be used for bridging. And there's like I said before, a simple queue that basically coordinates all of the data that needs to be signed. In terms of the underlying state machine, we extend things further with what is a hyperblock index. It's very similar to the Snapchain index, except we have a Verkle tree that basically allows us to post KZG blobs. We're not doing that yet, but we can. That'll be really important as Ethereum continues to grow. We have some outputs of per epic shares of the key material, which each validator is holding one. And then there's per epic DKLS group address registries, which is how we can guarantee rotation between each epic. Epics are basically how we, note who's coming in as a validator, who's leaving as a validator, any sort of events, like whether they've been misbehaving or not. And then in terms of the overall state machine for the Snap token, we have a note store. You can kind of think of it similar to Monero, a little bit of a hybrid, Monero and sort of Zcash-ish. If you're familiar with Q, it's literally the same approach that we use for Equilibrium for our confidential transactions. But the core principle is that you as a sender and the recipient, you can be aware of who's sending to who, but the rest of the network shouldn't necessarily have to be aware that those transactions have happened, how much they're for, and who is sending to whom. Of course, there is the reward store associated with running a validator. There's a trust score store, which is our essentially decentralized way of identifying spammers on the network, and a fingerprint store, which is important for noting proof of quality of messages. So one thing you'll see a lot of on Farcaster, like any other social media app, is sometimes there's memes where people will just repeat the same exact post everybody else has said because it's funny. If you're a well-established user, then that shouldn't impact you and you should be able to send that. That shouldn't matter. But we do have occasional bad actors that will just spam. They'll spam like, this wallet drainer mini app, or they'll spam the same message repeatedly. I know Dan, Rish, Horsefact, a few others were getting tag blasted yesterday by somebody who seems to have a bunch of sock puppet accounts. Just demanding that we talk to them on Telegram, or they'll just keep doing this, which is funny because that doesn't work. But nevertheless, that type of spam gets negated on Hypersnap because we actually look at the fingerprints of the messages in terms of what type of fee that message could encounter. So if you've got a low trust score and the fingerprint says spammy, then there's a fee associated with it. And that's how we mitigate spam at the Hypersnap layer. Snapchain works obviously differently. And then, of course, we have our own dedicated validator registry for the validator work that happens on Hypersnap. Epics are basically how we organize, any meaningful changes to the validator set. So when people decide that they want to enroll a node as a validator, they have to wait for the next epic to actually join in. And per epic, we have a DKG ceremony that splits the new key that we're rotating to each member of the set. And it's a basic, threshold of 2 of n over 3 plus 1. And that mirrors the actual BFT consensus at play as well. There's also validator scoring that it works hand in hand with our user scoring basis, so that if there's nodes that are just chronically offline and missing proof intervals or misbehaving or whatever, this ties into the overall scoring mechanism so that we can eliminate nodes that are intentionally trying to cause problems for the network without it causing any headaches for the network. And of course, all of this relates to how reward issuance, trust snapshots, bridge locking, inbound from burn, etc. all works. And then finally, the block production of Hypersnap, it ticks every block time. I actually mistyped here. It's not 3 seconds, it's 12 seconds. The proposer of the given block is derived from the active set of validators, plus any misproposal tracking that applies here. The construction is very simple, typical blockchain. You take messages from a mempool, you apply confidential transfers and locks to it to the Ripple tree to ensure that they're valid. You then take the snapshot state and then present that as the root for the block message, build the envelope, send a message, get consensus, etc. As far as Hypersnap is concerned, there's, like I said, just a few specific messages that we have our own gossip topics for. There's hyper signer messages, which handle dedicated off-chain signer registration. This is because we were going to ship this FIP whether or not Snapchain did, but since Snapchain did, we're compatible with it, and so this is just kind of a moot point. There's validator events, which is how we register and unregister validators per epic. There's the confidential lock body messages, which are the actual transfers of the snap token. There's the hyper lock Merkle root update message, which is how the actual bridge functions. The hyper owner rotation message, which rotates the actual members of a given validator set every epic. There's inbound burn, which is when a user wants to bridge back to Hypersnap. And then there's obviously some general bookkeeping message types like reward issuance, trust snapshot update, node attestation, app usage receipt, and mini app registration. And I'll get to that one in a sec because that's actually really important generally. Finally, there's also the hyperlock event. It was a message that's technically still around, but I only note it because you might see the message even if it's not actually in use anymore. Then as far as the bridge integration is concerned, there's, again, outbound confidential. Nobody knows the amounts until you hit the bridge, which actually does indicate how much, because otherwise how would you be able to mint without knowing the amount? And then the inbound processing, which is the L1 burn event. Relayer submits the burn. We verify that that event happened. And then, of course, the owner of the key that did the burn is the one that's able to bridge it back. In terms of basic defense in depth, we have Byzantine fault tolerant threshold derivation. That's how we basically eliminate any monolithic actor being able to change things. If you look at how layer 0's bridge worked, it's a definable quorum. In the case of the Kelp DAO hack, it was a 1-of-1 validator, which is literally the worst thing possible for a bridge. But that's how we avoid some of the consensus failings that happen in protocols and bridges, is that the validators of Hypersnap are also the quorum of signers that enables the bridge to function. These are some other basic defense in depth mechanisms we use to ensure that the protocol itself is very resilient in the face of attackers. And I'm happy to talk about those in greater detail, but I also want to be sensitive around time. And so the final thing that I want to note is the overall roadmap in direction of Hypersnap. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Snapchain team. That's not my place. And frankly, I don't even know. But in terms of the road ahead of what we're doing with Hypersnap, obviously the big one, which is the proof of work pull request that's in process that enables the Snap token to become network native and validators can start earning. That's currently being reviewed, has gone through a series of audits that have been very helpful in highlighting some unexpected things. But we'll be expanding also out the multi-chain bridge. So like I said, the bridge is functional on any EVM chain, but the actual underlying confidential transfers to the bridge do note a chain identifier as well as a chain family. So supporting Solana, supporting Equilibrium, supporting any other chain that wants to integrate is something we'll be able to do natively. Expanding our support of Verkle inclusion is something that we want to do, but again, this is pending architectural changes to Ethereum that we know are coming, but we don't know when. Proof of quality scoring and dynamic fee discounts. These are important attributes of the proof of work PR, but they're also really important for spam control overall and identifying spammy users over the network. And so we're going to be exposing that as well as an endpoint for client and mini app developers to have a universal spam score that applications can use. Obviously, the proof of work tokenization itself, and then the 3 families in which builders can earn. So there's users that are on the protocol helping grow the protocol, they get rewards. Users that are building applications, whether they're snaps, mini apps, or clients themselves, the usage receipts are things that can get relayed to Hypersnap, and it helps boost your own activity score of your app, and you can earn rewards by doing so. Outside of that includes things like moving channels onto the protocol and mini app state beyond the basic proof of work receipts for apps, and snap compute, which eliminates some of the backend costs when you're building either a snap or a mini app. You can actually eliminate them altogether and just have it run directly on protocol. And that's basically it, the ins and outs. I have about 9 minutes left for this session, so I want to open this up as an opportunity for people to ask questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cassie. That was a great wealth of information. Let me see. Does anyone have any questions? I actually asked a little bit here. We had a lot of awesome folks coming in saying hi, saying their best wishes. Some people saying lots of information coming through. So my goal is to get this transcript up tonight, up on the ZABALGamez.com website under recordings. I think it was awesome. I have a bunch of questions, but my first one, oh man, it was about having a client. What you have previously said in different capacities that one of the goals is to making a client easier. Where are you guys at with that today, and what's kind of let's say the 1 to 3 month plan with the different things you've done there?
Yeah, so high level, our goal within a year is to grow the Farcaster network to 1 million users, 1 million daily active users. I mean, not just, 1 million FIDs. We have millions of FIDs now, but it's very clear from the usage data, they're not around. So in service of that goal, we have essentially our 5 North Stars. And what's important to understand about what our intentions are with that, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. I have great difficulty in using DDocs, and so I might have to actually check GitHub first. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So over in github.com/org/farcaster.org/discussions, you can find all the FIPs that relate to Hypersnap and our previous call notes. And why I'm bringing that up is that our very first meeting, January 6th, we talked about what the North Star should be for this protocol and what we're going to be focusing on. So in the next 1 to 3 months, what our most immediate goals are, shipping things that makes it possible for clients to client developers to build a client more easily. Things that are, stuff users will want to use and help overall grow the network. And also just some basic pain points of stuff that's been really killing everybody trying to use the protocol. And so it breaks down into 5. Ship a real query layer, which means that it's, you no longer have to need a custom indexer to run a client. This is already done. This was one of the first things that we shipped. The second is to make client building basically a template plus SDK experience so that you can build a client in a weekend. Now, as I said, AI has moved very quickly, so it's actually pretty possible for people to do that now, even without the template and SDK. But we're still going to deliver this anyway, so that we have a best practices approach on how to do this. There's already open source repos, so there's github.com/Equilibrium Network/Quorum-Mobile, which is the Quorum Mobile source code that already has all of this, like batteries included. But we're going to expand this out into a dedicated SDK of its own. The third thing is turning channels and curation into first-class primitives. And what that means is that right now we have a basic feed integration on HyperSnap itself. So if you run a HyperSnap node, you turn on the API feature flags, you will get the feed generation happening automatically. But this is just basic reply bumping feeds. This isn't like, super exhaustive AI ML pipelines or anything like that. And so feed curation is a notoriously tricky problem for social, and it's also a notoriously opinionated problem for social. Everybody wants their own feed their own way, and you can't really just, do something unique for everyone. But what you can do is make it possible so that people can plug what they want in and shape their own feeds. So feed curation and channels to help communities self-organize on protocol are the third item. The fourth is to support mini app on-ramps and distribution. If you're building a client today and you want to know all the mini apps that exist, sorry, you can't. These are all locked behind Nanar's internal APIs, and you have to basically scrape them in order to get all of that content, or you'll have to go through every single cast that was ever posted and then check to see if those endpoints have a mini app manifest. And you have to check if they don't have a mini app manifest, if there's an internally hosted one with Nanar. It's a mess. So instead, we're going to put it at the protocol level so that actual discovery of mini apps and how much usage they're getting, how popular they are, all of that actually lives at the protocol instead of the private Nanar backend. The last thing, of course, is the native monetization and value distribution primitives. So in other words, if you are using, if you're interested in building a mini app that integrates the Snap token, it helps create the overall flywheel that brings more users onto Farcaster. It helps you be able to pay for any sort of hosting costs associated with it. It's just generally something that overall can benefit the ecosystem. And so for us, like we've already done the first stage of that, which is releasing the Snap token and the retroactive rewards associated with it for the proof of work for the user model, and then the proof of work PR at the protocol level, which is the next stage, unlocks the rest of the value distribution primitives and lets the flywheel run wild. And so for us, those are the big things. Like make it possible for people to build clients, make it easier for users to use their clients no matter which one they use so that everyone can talk to each other the same, and then make it possible so that node operators, developers, and users all win together.
Amazing. We got two more questions up in the queue. We got one from YouTube, curious about Snap EVM-compute.
Yeah, so we don't have a EVM compatible runtime for Snap. It's not impossible to do. In fact, actually, over at the Equilibrium side of things, and I should delineate, Equilibrium Inc. is a company that I own. The Farcaster org is not Equilibrium Inc. They're tangentially related because Equilibrium Inc. has a Farcaster client that uses it, but that's where the relationship starts and stops. The rest is, it's a community-run project. There's, I believe, 14 or 15 members of the org at this point, and they're all independent. The only person who works for Q Inc. that is a member of that org is me. The rest is completely unaffiliated. As far as that, the HyperSnap side of things goes, Snap Compute has a very lightweight virtual machine. It's much simpler than the EVM, and it's literally only there to help give people computational and storage primitives on the protocol so that they don't have to rely on deploying to Vercel, deploying to Nanar, deploying to whomever can host their Snap. It can literally live at the protocol level itself, and it just works. That's the sole purpose of Snap Compute. It is potentially expandable for doing tangled economic transactions with the token. It's just not there yet. So if you want to see the Snap Compute in its current state, go to github.com/farcaster.org/snap and then look for the Snap Compute pull request, and that'll show you where things are and what direction we're heading with it.
Awesome. And then we got one from Max Jackson over here on the spaces. Given FIP2, do channels actually need to be paid for? Is there a reason why Hyper can anyone create one? Or also, are we going to further extend FIP2 to target more types that the way it was intended? I don't know. There's a
I'll
couple
break,
different questions there.
yeah, no, I get the question. So I'm going to break it down into two answers because there's two different kind of questions at play here. The first is our approach with channels on HyperSnap. Just like any data storage that happens on HyperSnap, like with the standard user types like casts and likes, we're not applying storage to that. So if you want to create a channel, you can create a channel. You can create a channel for free. That's literally it. How that relates to FIP2 is, of course, FIP2 added a distinction between a parent root for a cast. So if you have it set to null, it ends up on the main feed as a root level cast, as it's called. If it's a reply to another cast, it has the cast ID that it's replying to. It's just a simple, chain of what it's pointing to. The FIP2 added a parent URL, which allows you to specify any other URL-driven content. Clients have ranged wildly in terms of its support, and anybody that wants to make a client that is at least on par with the Nanar app, unfortunately, has to use Nanar-specific identifiers for channels. That can change, and we'd like Nanar to change it with everyone so that it's less of a hassle, but that's the current situation. In terms of overall client support, like extending it to support other types of identifiers, I mean, that's what the FIP process is for. So if you go to, again, github.com/farcaster.org/protocol/discussions, you can, by all means, submit FIPs, and we can, all talk it out and figure out how to best support clients in a way that, one, doesn't have like unexpected hidden costs at the protocol level, but two, makes things great for others to build and grow clients.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Cassie, thank you so much for your time. If anyone has any last questions, you're welcome to come up on the space, say something, and or ask it. But someone here said an SDK for onboarding new users to the network would be a huge help. So that's cool. That's another thing that someone can maybe make during these ZABAL Gamez hackathons. So thank you, everyone who popped in. Lots of love from people all around. So W.O. Najee. Then we got Bad Mother Ducker in here as well. I'm not 100% sure who I001962E is, but if you're there on Farcaster, feel free to tag us and we'll show you some love as well. And then a lot of people in the chat over on the Farcaster side. So thank you so much, Cassie. That was super dense and I loved it. And I'm excited to break it down a little bit more. So thank you for your time. Is there anything else you want to share? What's the best place for people to reach out to you? It seems to be the GitHub discussions, right, for Farcaster.org to make their statements.
Yeah, for protocol-driven discussions, the GitHub org makes the most sense. If you'd like to join the HyperSnap group chat, just reach out to me on Farcaster at Cassie. I'm happy to add you. It's no problem at all. The only reason why we don't have public invite links for it is because, well, as you could imagine, whenever there's a token, then the conversation tends to shift, and this is a development-focused channel.
Amazing. I love it. Check out all of the stuff that Cassie's talking about. We're going to get this out as soon as possible, and feel free to ask more questions because I'm sure if there's anything in here that was over anyone's head, if you have the question, just tag Cassie on Farcaster and ask it, and I'm sure she'd love to break it down. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it, and we'll chat soon.